So hold on to your seatbelts. We are in for a phenomenal discussion this morning with three great guests. We've got Adolfo Babatz, the CEO and chairman of CLIP. We've got Eduardo Coello, the regional president of Latin America for Visa, and I'm sorry, I don't have the third name on my list here.
Wagner Ruiz from Ebanx.
Wagner with Ebanx. So we're glad to have all three of you here. This is going to be a great discussion today. We're talking about fintech, and I think at the core of this is, if you think about it, fintech impacts our lives every day. It's changing our world. It's changing how we do business, both personally and professionally. And the industry as it exists today, just 10 years ago, we couldn't have dreamed of the financial services industry being what it is today, or the fintech industry being what it is today. And we all rely on it to do business and deliver our lives. So we're going to hop right into it, with our distinguished guests. So we'll start with it. Now I have each of them just kind of share. We hear a lot about fintech, but the question is, what is it, and what innovations are you seeing, and how is it? Where's fintech going? So we'll start with you.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the panel. It's great to see both of you guys here. So you're correct. As 10 years ago, we didn't imagine where we were going to be today. I think even 5 years ago. And like most things in with new technologies, we saw an early rise 10 years ago with some financial services companies, mainly in the United States. There was one before, which was kind of an outlier, which was PayPal at the end of the 90s. But then we have kind of a dry period, and with Square in the States, I think that's when we start seeing the emergence of the new fintechs, right? They're coming out from the startup world. The original fintech is sitting right here to my left, which is Visa, but it was founded many, many years ago. And the first wave that we saw, and I'm speaking here about the US, is taking existing processes and services and making them digital. Okay, and this was access to online banking, some forms of payments, very basic stuff. As we started moving forward in the 2010s, the companies start becoming more sophisticated and starting offering different kind of services. This is when we start getting the companies like Stripe coming out of the weeds. It seems like out of nowhere, but they were there. So companies much more embedded in the Silicon Valley ecosystem, and where fintech really starts playing a more central role via embedded finance. Okay, and I think probably our friends here can talk a lot about more of that than I do. But embedded finance is really the second wave of what has become the fintech world. It seemed that it was going to be a third wave with crypto a couple of years ago. However, we know what happened with crypto in general over the last 2 or 3 years. So what is coming? I think we're going to see a much more prominent role of embedded finance. For those of you that are not as familiar with the term, embedded finance means the access to financial services even without seeing the financial services being very explicit. And this is, for example, being able to sign up for a digital account via an e-commerce website, for example. That's an example of embedded finance or a payment. And into the future, like I said, we're going to see more embedded finance. We're going to see what happens with crypto. At least in my opinion, or for me, it's a big unknown. And of course, we have AI, right? What does AI is going to do with fintech, and not only with fintech? I think fintech is just a small part of what AI is going to do with our entire life. I think crypto was, to some extent, a fad. There is an application, but there was a fad that was grown by cheap money, by basically the fact that we had very cheap money for a very long time. I think AI is completely different in terms of what are the implications, and I think we're going to see a very interesting mix of what I was mentioning earlier, traditional financial services being augmented, the kind of the first wave of fintech by AI, then embedded finance also augmented by AI, and there's going to be some completely new services coming out and new companies that are going to be based on the mash of financial technology, of finance, of, if you want to call it, traditional technology and AI. So I think the future looks interesting and promising.
Interesting, promising, lots of changes. I mean, I think you think about, we see the emergence of, AI integration. We are seeing, while crypto kind of has taken a dip, we still see a lot of blockchain and implications for the financial services industry. We see insurtech. We see a lot of things happening. Eduardo, coming from Visa, which is the granddaddy, if you will, of the fintech services industry, where have you seen the industry come from, and where is it going?
Well, also thank you for inviting me to this panel and for all of you your attention. I mean, if you see Visa as Adolfo mentioned, maybe the first fintech in the history, what we did initially was how can we help financial institutions to distribute consumer lending at a very efficient way without transferring the risk to the merchant. So that's how the credit card started. Then the debit cards allowed financial institutions to be more efficient, to allow all of us to have access to our deposits in an efficient way. And that is why debit has grown a lot in all parts of the world. Now, when we are having the opportunity with the technology of being closer to the needs of the consumer and the merchant, it's when all of these proposal from the fintechs is arising or has arisen since maybe more than 10, 15 years ago. When you see how and let me explain a little bit more about Latin America, when you see how the financial services have been growing in the region in the last 10 years, you will find that most of the value proposition comes from either companies that weren't present in the market by introducing better ways to have the connectivity with the consumer and the merchant. And that is how some companies or some banks became very large in the region, because they actually improved the experience for the consumer. It wasn't because of other pain points for the consumer other than how can I have a bank account? How can I have access to credit immediately? How can I have a payment credential right away? And since the penetration of smartphones became very popular in Latin America, then a lot of these companies leveraged that capability. On the seller side, on the merchants, because it's a counterpart of having, a payment credential, companies like a Clip that Adolfo founded opened, in the case of Mexico, more ways to accept payments in smaller markets, in smaller merchants, where they actually were providing the capabilities for consumers having already a credential to complete the transaction. Still, the opportunity in the region is very large. And even with the AI, all capabilities of Visa providing security, providing rails that are very efficient, about half of the private consumption in Latin America is done in cash. So we have still a lot of room to grow. This is the average in the region. There are markets like Brazil that has displaced cash at a very rapid pace in the last 3-4 years. It was already a very well penetrated market by electronic payments, but basically the RTP and also the growth of cards have displaced cash a lot. So technology is allowing us to be faster in the hands of the consumer with better experiences, knowing who to target, but also to keep the network safe. With AI, everybody talks about the right things about AI and how Visa, for instance, prevents fraud. But also with AI, you have people with better tools trying to attack all type of networks. So that is why also Visa invests a lot of money on cybersecurity, since many years ago and nowadays with the latest technologies.
That's great. That's great. Wagner, one of the things that we're seeing, of course, Latin America, and it's been hit on slightly by our other guests, but we're seeing, that fintech is really bringing new people into the financial markets and the ability to be able to, participate at different levels. Can you talk a little bit about how fintech has revolutionized the financial landscape across the Americas and how it's breaking down barriers from the traditional finance?
Sure. First of all, thank you also for receiving me. Just to give you an idea, because I will take the first question as well about the 10 years, because 10 years ago, here in the US is it different, but when we are talking about Latam, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, all these countries, 10 years ago, we were not imagining where we would be right now. And I will give you one example. We started the company in 2012, first in Brazil. Nowadays, we are in 29 countries. But in Brazil at the time, 45% of the people, the adult population, was unbanked, no bank account, 45%. More than like, I don't know, even with Visa there, was like 50% of the cash economy. Nowadays, we have 95% of the adult population with bank accounts. And this was a major change. And I will give you another example from ourselves. At the time, in 2012 or 2013, the approval rate for a purchase in Brazil was like 22%. Nowadays is like 98.5. So everything that happened in these countries, and another funny thing is you have Mexico, you have Brazil, and then you have Chile, Colombia, and we are in different timelines of the evolution in the financial system. So it's funny because you can almost see where we are going for the next 3 to 4 years, but only in these countries. But if you ask me again about 10 years, the next 10 years, I'm not sure. And I would say something about the crypto or blockchain or whatever. But man, the thing is, in the countries of Latin America, everything has changed, and then financial inclusion was amazing for 2 reasons. We, as you know, have lots of problems, economical, political, all the problems that you can imagine. So we know how to deal with problems and have new ideas. But something that we saw for the past 10 years was the enforcement, or at least the willingness of the regulator, all the regulators. Now we are talking about AI, they are already talking about AI, how to move forward. So I think using these 2 things, the willingness of the government and the regulators in every country, plus something that we have in Latin America, which is you can imagine in a country with 100% of inflation rate. So we need to find a way. So we have now money, and for the past 10 years, these 3 things, cash, innovative people, plus regulations. Even you just said about Visa as a granddaddy of fintechs, and it's true. But even Visa, companies like Visa, I'm not saying other names, they are changing there. They are helping to make the change. So this new payment method that we have in Brazil, Pix, is something that was almost imposed, but was a solution from the central bank, the regulator. Everybody's using, and companies like ourselves, young fintechs like ourselves, not young anymore, but 12 years is a lot. But Visa, we are everybody involved in this scenario. So banking, the largest bank in Brazil today, it's not a bank. It's a new bank. It's a payment institution, and they are the largest in market cap. And they have, I don't know, 100, I'm not sure, I don't remember the name, but it's like 100 million accounts. It's something crazy, only on mobile without any branches. Something that 10 years ago, everybody was willing, like we are on the EI, on the crypto side, but it's something, and I think the magic happens when you have that. The need, people, innovative people, and the enforcement, or at least the willingness of all the regulators that you can see in all countries nowadays. So it's a different life from 10 years ago. I'm not sure exactly where we will go, but I bet on blockchain and AI as, not saying about crypto because it's shady, I'm not sure exactly, but the technology to do things, we are using blockchain already on the back end of the transactions. So it's amazing. I think this is and the life has changed for everybody, and it's very fun. Even Mexico, we are in Mexico as well. We had when I saw 7 years ago when we started. Right now, with new banks, alternative payment methods, which is something that we can see everywhere in all countries, different ones, but in all countries. Even if you look India with UPI, which is revolutionizing the payments as well. We have Pix in Brazil. We have all the other countries trying to do. This is inclusion.
You know, it's interesting. Eduardo, I'm going to pick on you for a minute because you're kind of the big old established company that's had to probably, not only lead, but also innovate because of the emergence of, partially due to the emergence of all of the other fintech companies. I mean, here in Miami, it feels like every week I have another fintech company from somewhere in Latin America that's coming here to, run their Latin American operations. And it seems like the market is evolving at a rate that I don't know that it's sustainable long term, but it's exciting to see the amount of energy, young entrepreneurs and fintech companies emerging. How does Visa, think about working with and engaging a lot of the startup fintech companies that may be in spaces that are related but not exactly what you do?
Well, sorry. Can you ask another question to another person?
No worries. So Adolfo, I mean, you're a company that's grown at an amazing clip. What are you seeing in terms of the startup landscape as it relates to fintech, and what are the opportunities for startup companies to engage and grow? What are the spaces where they're the best opportunities now?
So I think you have to break it up by country because, like you correctly mentioned, the different countries are in different stages. Brazil, mostly given the role that cards on the issuer side and acquirers on the merchant side had over the last few years. Pix was successfully mounted on top of that, so it leapfrogged not only the region, it leapfrogged the United States, for example. So Brazil is a great example of where things are going to be, I think, over the next few years, as well as India. India is the other market where there has been a massive amount of innovation, both on the public side and as well on the private side. So the areas that we see, specifically, for example, Mexico, which is where we operate, in the case of payments, which is mostly what we do, just to give you an idea, there are about $1.4 trillion of per year of consumer to business payments done every year in Mexico. Today, the current volume that is being processed is about 300 billion. Okay, so if we do like quick, numbers, we have about $1 trillion out there waiting to be processed. $1 trillion per year. This is not like a 10-year. $1 trillion per year. Credit is another one. Credit in Mexico as percentage of GDP. I don't recall the number, but it's something like 4 or 5%. A market like Brazil, I think it's something like 30 or 40%. The United States, something like 80%. Okay, so we still have a very, very long way to go in credit. Insurance is a market that is incredibly underdeveloped in the entire region. I think insurance it's a more sophisticated and complicated product, at least from my point of view. I have a very hard time reading insurance policies. I don't know if you guys happen the same to you. I found them kind of cryptical, but that's another area where we're going to see a massive amount of, or we should see a massive amount of innovation. Blockchain. How do we apply blockchain to the back end, to different processes along with AI? That is also one area of opportunity. Not to the end consumer, but for companies that are going to be creating tools and services based on these technologies that provide services to financial services companies. So almost, if you take I don't know if any of you has seen Many years ago, there was a post that it had the Craigslist homepage. You remember Craigslist homepage with all the different areas, right? And how every single startup in the US was focusing on one of the areas that Craigslist offer, or what the services that Craigslist offer. I think we're seeing the same with the financial services industry. If you take a bank and everything that a bank offers, from payments to wealth management to lending, everything, there's a startup waiting to get there. And I think what is very interesting at the emerging markets in general is that a company in emerging markets, by definition, has a lot more potential than an established player. The most evident example is Nubank, that became larger than the rest. And the reason is very simple. The vast majority of the population is still not served or is underserved. So a startup can really take a disproportionate amount of market share in a very short amount of time. And I think we're going to see more and more of these dynamics as we move along.
I mean, I think it's really interesting. You're talking about the fact that there are still, despite all of the companies that we're seeing, despite all of the growth of the fintech services, there's still huge gaps in terms of service offerings from the fintech.
Huge. In Mexico, you could have 20 clips, and there will still be market for everyone. I mean, it's $1 trillion, guys. It's an insane amount of money.
It's great. Eduardo, would you like to build on that?
Yes, in Visa, we are very active with, to be close to the fintech community. Actually, we have an annual event where we invite any fintech in the region to come and present their idea, they pitch their company to us. We do it around the world as well, and we have a final event for Latin America, and then the finalist or the winner for LAC competes with the winner of the winners of other parts of the world. So that is the Visa Everywhere initiative. And we have already received in the last 5 years 1,000 number of ideas in Latin America and the Caribbean.
1,000 ideas.
So that means that a lot of people are looking into the opportunity, finding ways with now the technology that is very accessible to have initial hypothesis, initial prototype, and to pitch it. Actually, some of the companies who have presented or participated in this event have already been either invested by VCs, acquired by other technology companies. So at the end, we are promoting this because as Visa, we are the network. We want to connect points. And if someone can provide a safe way to bring transactions, either with a better consumer experience or a better merchant experience to accept the payments, we want to promote that. Regardless on the technology on how the transaction flows from one point to the other, regardless on what is it, your form payments is, in the past it was the max stripe, then the chip, now the phone. In the future is going to be biometrics or other type of credentials that you will present to the network. We want to be there because that is the way that we can continue promoting commerce and bringing efficiencies to the economies.
Wagner, building on that, two ideas. One is, we've talked a little bit about the startup ecosystem and kind of the fact that there's a proliferation of all of these companies. Latin America, though, is a very diverse market. I would say that there are no two countries that are really the same. You've got a lot of regulation. Regulation differs. What are some of how does the industry manage, or how should the industry manage kind of the challenge of regulation in different markets, and how should entrepreneurs that are looking at Latin American markets in terms of expanding their fintech businesses think about it?
I think you are right. We have this thing in Latin America because everyone from US or Europe, they think Latin America is more or less the same. And for us, it's funny. For us, it's worse because in Brazil, we don't speak Spanish. So even the language is a problem. We speak Portuguese. But the thing is, this was what we did for the past 10, 12 years. You need to be there. You need to have to understand the local culture. So even the Spanish, which is something funny, if you go to Mexico, it's a different Spanish from Uruguay. It's a different Spanish from Argentina. And it's also a different way of thinking, usually. They think differently. And if you move that to the regulators and the government is pretty much the same. We have one very interesting thing, which is Brazil and the success that Brazil had for the past 10 years. So now you have all the other regulators watching and looking what Brazil done and trying to do something similar to that. So that's why we are now in different stages, but somehow you can say, okay, Mexico is also super advanced, but they are going to this way. Colombia is going to this way. But to build your company and to build that, that's why you don't have too many companies, startups or whatever, in multiple countries. It's very hard. It's very hard. Even Nubank, which is a great success case in Brazil, they are now starting and in Mexico. Not sure how they are doing there, and the guy Davi, it's from Colombia, so it's funny. It's very challenging for us. In our case, we were able to do that because as startups, as entrepreneurs, I used to spend 9 months in Mexico, talking to the regulators, talking to the banks. So you need to respect culture. You need to have local knowledge, otherwise it's a nightmare. And you need to understand the timing to get things done. I mean, talking about the regulations. But now with Brazil, you can see, and one is not related to Latam, but if you look, India the impact is so big in what they are doing. It's also impacting countries in Latam and also in Africa. So I think you need to respect culture, you need to have local knowledge, and you need to be very close to the regulator. And I think this is the only way to build a structure in all the countries.
I want you to build on that. You said India is changing the game for everybody. What does that mean?
India, because of the population, the number of transactions, and the cash, they were a cash. We have companies like Visa and Master saying, let's try to get cash out of the streets, which is better. But there is a different society, culture, and with the UPI, which is the instant payment, is something they are already. I don't remember the numbers, but it's like crazy. They have 50% of all transactions in the world, non-cards. If you just consider cards, they have 50% of the transactions, which is huge. And it's a very good technology. So even Pix in Brazil, which is our instant payment, is somehow, because they are connected, Pix and UPI, the regulators, the central bank are talking a lot. So even our structure is very similar to their structure. Of course, the QR code was something that 4 years ago everybody was doing. But connecting that and with something that you said, which in Brazil we are calling the open finance, and this can change everything. So the impact that you see in India, the regulations that you have in countries like Brazil, Mexico, you can foresee somehow how and adding the open finance, so you'll be able to have a website for sell something, I'm not sure, a marketplace with embedded finance, doing the open finance regulations that you can see everywhere, including Brazil. And that's why the network, it's also important because it's connecting everything. So I'm enthusiastic.
Eduardo and Adolfo, both of you look like you want to build on it, so please.
I fully agree with what Wagner is saying, and we also need to be very close to the regulator, because in many cases, this industry looks very simple from the outside, and making some assumptions on how to help are not always the right ones. So we also have a team that is close to the regulators, having very open conversations about how things in this industry work. And that's also a big effort that all of us do at the same time with the regulators. And they are very open also to have this type of conversations.
So building on what both Wagner and Eduardo just mentioned, so I think it's important to understand, and this is, Eduardo hit right on point. If you look at it from the outside, it seems that everything is the same. But for example, UPI and PIX in Brazil, right? Aside from China, which is a completely different animal. These are the two successful case stories for real-time payments around the world, but they come from very different sides. In the case of India, a very cash-heavy society, the Indian government invested first in a technology called Aadhaar, which is every single Indian citizen is registered at a biometric level on a central database. With that, they are able to open bank accounts and every type of account on a phone immediately doing the KYC. And on top of that, they mounted UPI, which is the real-time payment system. And on top of that, the central bank heavily subsidized the transactions, or has been subsidizing the transactions for a very, very long time. So those were kind of the building blocks to get UPI to where it is. In the case of Brazil, it's very different. Brazil was already, like Eduardo correctly mentioned, a very well penetrated market, mostly in the card network rails, Visa and MasterCard and local things, but mostly Visa and MasterCard. And Pix was mounted on top of those rails. So Brazil was already very, very highly penetrated. And they made the incentive place, the incentives for Pix very good. As far as I know, the central bank is not subsidizing anything in Brazil, completely different from India, and they have seen massive success. So this is to Eduardo's point. Just because you saw Pix in Brazil being successful or UPI in India, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen in Mexico or that it's going to happen in Philippines. It's a complete different world and a complete different animal, every single market. What Wagner was saying, the idiosyncrasies of every single country are reflected in the financial systems, in the regulators, and how things are approached. So what is going to work, for example, in Mexico, I am sure it's not going to be what India has. Why? Because I highly doubt there's going to be a biometric. Like here in the US, people are very resistant to having that. Mexico, I doubt that we're going to have the same. Are we going to go the route of Pix in Brazil? Well, maybe, but the financial penetration is not there yet. So what is going to happen? Okay, so it's very interesting to see where we are right now, the markets that are a little bit behind, how things are going to evolve over the next few years. And this is why we have to be very close to the regulators, because sometimes regulators have a lot on their plate and they cannot see every single detail that Wagner, Eduardo, and I have the time and commitment to see, because that's the only thing we do.
Wagner, you want to?
No, I was about to say about Brazilian Pix. Yes,
What's
the
Pix?
central,
For those that don't know.
the central bank is not subsidizing anything, and I'm not sure if it's a compliment. But in the end of the day, what they did was to enforce the acceptance. The surprise, enforce the acceptance by the side of the financial institutions. No choice. You need to have that. It's not an option. But the surprise was the system was so good that the people loved. And the rest of the people without banking account, they now needs to have bank account because they need to have access to the. So it's everything together. And I understand Mexico. It's a complete different animal as well for me as a Brazilian specifically. And you have other alternative payment methods already big. In Brazil, the only way was to having the central bank using the power to enforce acceptance. I think was otherwise. I was a guy in Brazil saying this 5 years ago. If you asked me, I would say the banks will never allow that.
But speaking of how different it is, in Mexico, the Central Bank of Mexico released a thing called CODI before PIX, and they enforced it on the banks also, same as in Brazil, and it didn't work. So something that in theory should have worked, it didn't work at all. So it's every single market is very different.
So we have time for, I think, one more question, and we haven't hit on the question of adoption and cybersecurity. I mean, I think there's a few things. So one is every day I feel like there's a new financial fintech solution that's out there, and I'm probably the guy that's more apt to jump in and say what this is, but what are you seeing in terms of adoption rates by both consumers as well as, and B2B platforms, as well as what are the cybersecurity realities in terms of how you all are navigating that? Because I imagine that each day there's more threats.
So in terms of adoption, I think when I started a company, many people, many funds especially, were telling me, I started in 2012, so it was basically no VC money in Latin America yet. They were telling me this is never going to work in Mexico because people don't like to pay taxes, right? And I think it's a very simplistic bankish argument because what I told them, and I thought it turns out that I was right, that if you provide people with a good service that actually solves them a problem, not causes more problems, and that helps them, in our case, sell more, they are going to use it. Again, here we are 12 years later, and I think that is the case. So in terms of adoption, as long as you provide a service to the consumer, to the merchant, or in the case of B2B to other companies, that is useful, that actually works, people are going to adopt it. What you were mentioning about blockchain, you're using blockchain because for some things it actually works. So I think the issue we had a few years ago is we had too many companies chasing problems that didn't actually exist, okay, or fake problems or problems that were not big enough. Like Wagner correctly mentioned, unfortunately or fortunately, we have a lot of problems in Latin America. So there's a lot of things that we can get to work and solve. So as long as you solve something, you are going to see huge, massive adoption, and that adoption is going to become cheaper than in the US or other developed markets because simply there's not as much competition, and most of the people are still underserved or unserved. Okay. Now, in terms of cybersecurity, I think we all see it every single day. I mean, I don't know how many thousands of attacks Visa receives every day, same as you guys, same as us. The point here, this is only going to get worse. Why? Because you have now AI that is being applied, of course, to cyber. When you have things like embedded finance, you have more open points, you have more vulnerabilities out there that actually can get into your code. And what you have to do here is, as a startup, at least, is tricky to manage the balance between growth and security. Because you can go all the way down to security, but you're going to become such a monolith that actually cannot move, and you won't get any issues. If you go to the other side, to complete the other side, you will get hacked in less than a day. So the trick is finding that balance, something that is healthy from a financial point of view, from a risk management point of view, and making sure that at least me as the CEO of a company, that you're very, very close to your technology team and the team that actually is overseeing cybersecurity, and that they understand, the teams inside the company understand the business needs and the business objectives and the strategy of a company. That is extremely important, because once you share that and they actually understand it, the mindset is very, very different on their end.
I mean, I would say that the adoption is growing very, very fast because us as consumers, if it is in our phone, we think that it is there, that it is secure, and if it is convenient and easy to use, we adopted it very, very fast. And especially the younger generations, if it is in the internet, it is the whole truth. So obviously people are adopting things very fast. The big responsibility for a network like Visa is how do we keep all of that safe, and how can we leverage the investments that we are doing as a company with other companies, because in the cybersecurity challenge, the more we collaborate, the better. The more we share information, the more we leverage the platforms that we all have, we will be better positioned on that regard. What we see in the region, and that is why the examples that we have been explaining here, in Latin America, we have adopted many, many digital solutions, not only in payments, because people have the access, people trust that if it is there, it is good. Actually, if you see the numbers in Latin America on how much time people get engaged on social media in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's actually higher than in the US. People like to be social and sharing things and understanding what the life of the others are. So if I recommend something, that is why also these influencers are becoming a very, very, aspirational career for young Latin Americans. So adoption is fast, cybersecurity is a responsibility, and we invest a lot of money and resources to do that.
Oh, I agree. I think the acceptance, the The thing is, if you have a problem, if you solve a problem, you have the UI, meaning you have the UX, you have the acceptance, people will use. It's in the phone, everybody's using. So the use of new technologies and solutions is not a problem, I think, anymore. And talks a little bit with something that we said a few minutes ago. It's not simple like that, just an app doing everything. So you have lots of things on the back end. But if you solve a problem, if it has the UX or the acceptance, they will use. And on the cybersecurity side, it's funny because I see two angles. You have the technology, of course, is changing. You need to improve. They will hack. They will try to hack. But if you look into the financial system and payments, because we are in payments, then I will say about companies like Visa, because they have so high standards since the 60s, and they are improving that as well, that when we do something, we use like this standard. So I remember a funny story. When we start to accept cards in your company, you need to do the PCI compliant certification, which is something that they are demanding to process with them. So this is something that I believe from the old financial system and with companies like Visa, we are improving on daily basis, but we have the rails. But on the technology side, you always will have hackers and new technologies, and you need to improve. You will be attacked. It's not a question if we will be or not, but when and how. You need to be prepared.
So in wrapping up, I'd love to share just some of the highlights from our conversation today. So the first one I think is, 10 years ago, no one could have envisioned that we'd be where we are today. And in this process, we've seen, numerous waves. So the first wave was really taking traditional processes and banking processes, et cetera, and bringing them to tech. The second wave was really, around more embedded finance. And then, of course, now we're in another wave, which we'll see what it actually comes, but it's, crypto, blockchain, AI, and where that goes from here. And there seems to be limitless opportunities, whether it's reg tech, whether it's fintech, whether it's insurtech, for this industry to continue to grow. And we like to believe, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, as the CEO of the Beacon Council, that we believe that Miami should be the hub of fintech for the world. And we want to continue to work on that. What we're seeing is a high level of adoption rates by consumers, because consumers want things more efficiently. And if you're solving for problems that people actually have, that you're going to see a high level of adoption. That said, we understand that the Latin American landscape, as the U.S. landscape and others, each country is different. So in order to have a high level of success in these countries, it's very important that there's a recognition that these countries are different, that governments are different, and the markets are different. And so you have to enter these new markets respecting the culture, getting the local knowledge, being close to the regulators, and having a good understanding of the timing that it's going to take to get things done. And to understand that things happen in one way, one market, that it's going to be the same in the other is highly not likely. And then India is changing the landscape for financial services, for fintech, because of their pure mass as it relates, and their focus in terms of how they're regulating it and putting their finger on the scale for the sector. And then last but not least, companies are going to be attacked, especially when you're dealing with money. Everybody wants to find that magic code, but companies have to balance this idea of growth versus that idea of security. Thank our panelists again for a wonderful discussion.